Okay, so before we begin, this is the first time I'm recording something like this, and well, this is my studio. It's a bit small, and I had to use a coat hanger as a webcam tripod, so yeah, rate my setup. Or please don't. The lighting at the start is a bit rough, but it does improve later, at least during the important parts. Oh well, without further ado, let's go. This is the Chimera. Looks great, yeah, but look at my quasar. Or this onager. Or my interdictor, which I've just started. It just doesn't fit. I'll have to repaint it, and while I'm at it, I will light it up like I did with this ISD. How can you do this? Well, thankfully Armada models are hollow inside. Well, mostly hollow. There usually is enough space to fit an LED light inside and maybe a battery. So the first thing you want to do is, well, to open the unsuspecting thing. By the time I decided to make this video, I've already gotten started on Chimera, so let me show you on an Architens. This one is fresh out of the box, so get your model and get a utility knife. What you want to do is to find the gaps. Sometimes they are obvious, like this one here. Stick your knife into the gap and simply twist. These models use very little glue, and this way the glue will crack, usually with any clamps that are holding separate pieces. Often pieces are interlocked. This Architens clearly only has glue on the front, so let's try the other end, let's wiggle its engines. And the bottom already has popped out. Let's try the other side. And we're clear. It's almost open. The only thing left to do is to cut through the glue on the front. There is very little space inside, probably not enough to fit the batteries that I have, so I'm going to move on to the Chimera. I'll do the same thing as before. I found a gap in the middle, stuck my knife in, and cracked clamps on this side. I got lucky. Usually they are much tougher to crack, so you may need to cut through them. It's different for every model. I've already cut through the front, and I cleared that side. So let's move to the other side, repeating the steps from before. Stuck my knife in, I twisted, cutting through what didn't break off. I'll speed up a bit here because this is the point where I started to struggle. These models sometimes have glue in very tricky places, not just side clamps and the nose. I'm struggling to open it because, as opposed to the other ISD I opened, this one was also glued at the internal columns that I will show you later. I eventually identified 5 spots where glue was used. Knowing that I need to cut hard now, I put a folded paper towel under the model. This is to minimize damage. Force required to cut through will malform any edges that aren't resting on a soft surface. The rear 2 corners are the hardest to break. There's a lot of plastic and there's always a lot of glue in those spots. I ran out of patience and, well, don't repeat what I'm doing here. This is not the way. Okay, confirming that the rear edge is free, I start cutting pieces inside. First, the 2 rear clamps and a column near the nose. There are only 2 remaining spots which are hard to reach deep inside. At this point you can just use force and carefully tear the model apart. I didn't actually get the rear clamps before, so here I go again, trying to cut them through. Once I do get them, it's back to using force. And snap! There it goes. It's going to be loud, so don't be surprised. Take a look. Like I've said before, 5 points were glued. Especially the rear rods were flooded. This one actually looks a little different from the old one. Let's compare. And look, see the 3 broken columns? They are empty in the old ISD, as they weren't glued. And this shape inside is different, so yeah, the Chimera is apparently a different mold. With that done, let's open the superstructure. Grab a flat screwdriver and just press on those clamps. We're taking this apart because I want to include lights in the superstructure. Don't worry if you break a clamp or 2 or 10. We will be gluing this back together anyway, so it doesn't matter. The bridge, on the other hand, you will want to pull away at an angle, like if you were snapping the model. The engines are held by plastic and a simple clamp. They usually aren't glued. And alright, most people would install lights inside, secure them, secure optic fiber, and then paint the model. I'm very lazy, so I'll paint first and then do all the work. Probably wondering, what the hell am I doing right now? I will admit, I can't paint to save my life and I want to preserve the Chimera pattern. I'm using a thick glue, normally used for furniture and other wooden items, to coat it in a layer that will, well, protect it from paint. I'm sure there are better ways of doing this, but this is the one I chose. Okay, I forgot to open the bridge before. Let's do it the same way we did the main hole. Find a gap, stick your knife in, twist or wedge, anything to break the glue apart. After glue cracks, just force it open, but watch for bending plastic. If the plastic is bending too much, it might break. I've chosen a black coat, standard Abaddon black. It has to match the rest of my fleet. I try to lay a neat, even layer, but hey, the keyword here is try. I follow it up with an uneven dark blue layer. I want the black base to remain visible or even not covered at all in some places. I put the superstructure back together to get a better result. The bridge isn't here, and yes, that's because I have a different plan for it. It's time for the main color of the ship, my favorite kind of light blue. I use it around the edges and along the middle to highlight core parts of the ship. It's very basic, but it does look very decent. And finally, I mix myself an orange color, because of course I forgot to buy an orange paint, and paint the engine cones from the inside. I don't care about being too clean right now, because it will be all sharpened and cleaned up later. Afterwards, I picked white to the engine cone edges. The paint, however, was too watered down, so the result isn't great. I had to fix it with orange. The coat on the hull has dried, so it's time to see if my glue strategy worked. I find a thick layer, I insert my knife and peel. It worked! Taking it all off would still take me 30 minutes, however. But it did preserve the pattern, which is what I wanted it to do. The light grey chimera looks nice, but I have other plans. Gold. Enjoy me wrecking a perfectly good model. First, a bit of reddish gold as a base, then somewhat colder gold as highlights, and after that I used the airbrush dark blue to hide mistakes and create displaced darker hull plates like Imperial ships tend to have. Finally, I wanted to have a visible red outline for the entire chimera pattern. With the red outline done, it's time to use the best crutch I have, or any other bad painter has, Nuln oil. I put it all over the golden image, and then I use Storm Shield to secure the model, at least for now. Now is the time for what you came here for soon. Before we start installing LEDs, we need to clean the model up from the inside. We have to make space. The top piece is rather flat, but it will have to be cleaned up to close the model properly. The bottom piece, however, is a different story. There is lots to do here. This has to go. This broken piece has to go as well. And well, we have to clean the whole thing up. We will do this by using a hand drill with a sandpaper head. This is the quickest way to get rid of all that plastic and make it even, smooth, without any sharp edges. Keep in mind that plastic will heat up due to friction, but that's not a problem, not yet. One side is gone, the other one has to go as well. Then we move on to cleaning up. Broken pieces of plastic will stick up higher than unbroken pieces, so if you don't get rid of them, the model will simply not close properly. I have to clean up the two corner pieces, the 3 glued locking rods, as well as the 4 clamps on both sides of the model, both at the top and at the bottom. Now that's done, we need to make way into the ship's superstructure. I'll be using a thinner diamond-tipped grinder, and you will want to drill slowly and go slowly to avoid molten plastic buildup, which you will see in just a moment. Unfortunately for me, this drill's slowest setting is 8000 RPM, so it's very hard to avoid this buildup. See? See how much there is? If you drill slowly and be patient, you will avoid it most of the time. Okay, I am cutting out a large hole, but I do want the places where clamps go left intact. They will be needed later. I'm going to repeat the process for the other 2 superstructure levels that I need to go through. And done. Now I'll be able to put optic fiber into every floor of the superstructure. Let's move on to LED themselves. This is an LED, as I'm sure you know. Basically, everything you need to know about working with LEDs at this level is that there is a positive leg, or wire, and a negative leg. In transparent LEDs, you can easily tell which one is which. The positive leg ends in a very thin piece of metal inside the bulb, while the negative leg ends in a really thick piece of metal. And the negative leg is at the top and the positive one is at the bottom. If the bulb is not clear, it's not transparent, you can tell by the length. The positive leg in a factory-made LED is always longer than the negative leg. There are different types of LEDs. This one is the standard type. It will emit light in front of it at an angle of about 30 degrees, and, well, it has a transparent bulb. The other type I sometimes use has colored bulb. This is what is called a diffusing LED. It will emit light at a much wider angle, but at a lower intensity. There are also straw hat LEDs. They are smaller and flatter, but emit light at a very wide angle. They are useful if you don't want to use optic fiber and just light up the entire inside of a model. There are many more different kinds, but these three are the ones I used the most often. Aside from LEDs, you will also need, let's sum it up. Okay, I will be using two standard orange LEDs for engines. I'll also be using two standard red LEDs for ship lights. I'll take a single small diffusing green LED, just because I can, and on top of that I will be using some thin cables, white for positive wire, black for negative wire, power supply, which is a CR2032 battery, 3 volts, pretty much the best one you can use for this kind of work. A battery bed, weak resistors, and a switch. I like this one. It's simple to connect, it has a moving lever, and I will be honest, I dislike buttons that need to be pressed. You risk pushing them inside the model, which is problematic. And that's mostly it, except for optic fiber. I have several different sizes. 1.5mm, which I'll be using for the big engines, 1mm, which will go into the smaller engines, and, well, smaller fiber, which I will be using for ship lights all around the model, 0.8 or 0.6, depending on what I choose later. So how do you work with LEDs? First things first, you will need to drill a large hole in your LED. We need to do this because we will be installing optic fiber strands inside the bulbs for better lighting and to make sure they don't break, or to make sure they don't break off. The final hole will be drilled with this drill bit, but LEDs are round. If you use sandpaper to flatten the tip, it will be much easier to drill inside of them. So this is the first thing you will do. Grab an LED, grab sandpaper, and flatten it. This should be flat enough. We will start drilling with a smaller bit than the one we are planning to use at the end, to make what is usually called a lead hole. A larger bit might slip and destroy the LED. So, with a lead hole, it will be much easier for us to create that larger hole. The final hole should be around 3mm wide, but I will start off with a 1mm drill. Be very careful not to drill too deeply or for too long, because the LED will break or burn. You'll want at least 1mm of space between the hole you drill and metal components inside. Every time you finish drilling, check if the LED still works. I will now repeat the process for other LEDs I've picked. And now for the main drill. Same process, just a larger hole. And same as before, check if the LEDs still work, just in case we drill too deep. With LEDs ready to get optic fiber in them, We should start preparing the model for them, so we know how many we will have to install in each LED. I always start with the engines, the largest and simplest part to light up. I've inserted the engines back into the lower half of the model to measure how much fiber I will need. The best place to put an engine LED is around here. The further away, the less each strand will have to bend when we insert it into the model. Since the LED is going to be around here, I've chosen how long I want my strands to be and cut longer pieces. Always cut longer pieces than you need. Now, picking a drill bit to use, this 1.4mm seems fine. Always use a drill bit just a little bit smaller than you need. And I'm just starting. Carefully inserting the bit where I want it to go, and start slowly. Can you see the plastic flying around? It loves to wrap around the drill, and it's going to wreck everything. If it wraps around your drill, back off, because it will heat up very quickly and destroy your model with friction. It will melt the plastic around it. I've repeated drilling for each engine, and now I'm checking if strands can pass through the hole. Sometimes you don't want strands to fall out. These here are only for measurement, so I don't really care, but there will be a moment when they might fall through the drilled holes. This is how you secure them. Optic fiber strongly reacts to heat. If you let it heat up, it will expand and retract into itself. It will emit dimmer light, but at a wider angle. At this stage we don't need precision, so we can just take a lighter and let it burn near each strand. However, don't let the fire touch anything, it will instantly ruin the part of optic fiber. Just hold it close and a mushroom-like shape will appear. Do this and strand endings will become wider than the holes we drilled. With the 3 main engines in, I'm going to repeat the process for the 4 smaller engines. Same technique, but it turns out I need to clear out more plastic. The strands will have to go through more layers of plastic than the big ones, so some maneuvering and wiggling will be required here. Remember, it's better to drill a smaller hole and then widen it up a little than to drill one that is way too big from the start. While we still have our drill in hand, let's make space for the light switch. I figured the best place to put a light switch is inside the hangar bay. I have roughly measured the switch and marked it on the model and started drilling. The hole is just a little too big on the sides. Guess what? We'll use the wood glue to plug the hole. It doesn't contact electricity, so it's safe to use. It will turn into a solid, semi-transparent, smooth surface that will be easy to mask with paint. Just need to even it out and put into some harder to reach spots, and voila! It's ready! Time to install the battery slot. This is where I want to put it, but well, let me get my cables. In this battery bed, this pin is the positive pin, which I know because the battery is supposed to be inserted with the negative side down, and well, this pin is connected to the top part, and the other one is connected to the bottom. To place the bed around here, we'll need around this much of the cable. The black one will be used for our negative wire, and I will use the white one for the positive one. Always cut a bit more than necessary. We have to expose copper wire inside. You can use a cable stripper, but I prefer to use my knife. Cut lightly, tear the rubber off, and twist the copper strands inside so they stay together. Do the same thing on either end. Now that our cables are ready, let's start attaching them. I'll begin by attaching each one to the power switch, because it's easier to show how to solder, but normally we'll start by attaching them to the battery bed. This is a 3-pin power switch. Keep in mind that power travels in a closed circle. For that reason, we will attach cables on opposite sides with the LED positive wire in the middle. When the power switch is flicked, it will connect both positive wires and create a closed circuit. When it's flicked again, it will interrupt the power flow and cut the battery off. After it's in, bend it so it stays in. Afterwards, heat it up so it's more receptive to solder, and apply just a drop of soldering iron. Repeat the same steps for the positive wire. Now we are going to attach those wires to battery bed. I should have done it first, but hey. I'm using a third-hand tool here to hold the bed and the cable. I line them up, heat them up and solder together. And again, repeat the same steps for the negative wire. Now, look at this. The battery bed takes way too much vertical space. Bend the pins. We do this after soldering because, well, it's easier to solder when they are straight, but now they have to be bent. And now just fit the bed. I could use a hot glue gun to put it in place right now, but I don't want to do this until engine lights are in place. Let's move on to LEDs. We are using a 3-volt power supply. Most LEDs work under lower voltage, which means we should add some resistors, so these LEDs last longer and don't burn out. While a 3-volt battery almost certainly won't burn a 2.3-volt LED, like this orange one, it's better to be safe than sorry. You don't want to take your model apart in the future and replace a burnt out LED. There's a huge range of different resistors, so you can either do the math yourself or use an online calculator to find out which one you need. In this case, I need basically the weakest one I have, which is 18 ohms. Either way, we want our LED to be as compact as possible. We will cut the long legs close to resistors and close to bulbs, leaving just enough to comfortably solder. Remember, resistors have to be in front of the power flow, which means they have to be attached to the positive leg, where the power enters the LED. And same as before, we are using the third-hand tool to hold and line up what we are soldering, and same as before, heat up the wires a little bit before, and then apply a drop of solder. Repeat for all remaining LEDs. We want our engines to be as compact as possible. I will solder both of these LEDs together, making use of those very flexible legs that resistors tend to have. I wrap one around the other, making sure that both positive and negative wires touch each other only in the exactly one spot I picked before. It's time to prepare ship lights. Get your optic fiber strands and superglue in gel form. It's important for it to be in gel form because most liquid superglue brands work by melting the material they touch. A molten optic fiber strand is useless. I will be using very thin 0.6mm strands of optic fiber. This is how they look. Throw away the ones that are shorter than around 8 to 10 centimeters. They will be useful in other projects, but not this one. Those strands come from some cheap toy lamps from some cheap Chinese store. Each lamp is like $1 and has around 150 strands that are at least 30 centimeters long, so quite useful and quite the bargain. Anyway, the first thing we need to do is to fit them inside our LEDs that we hollowed out before. The way we fit them is by putting a small amount of superglue inside the hole in the bulb, and then trying to get as many as possible inside by pushing a whole bunch at once. After you push them in, start finding strands that didn't make it inside and try to insert them between those that did enter the bulb. Okay, this many went in easily. Now we can start pulling and adding those loose strands back. While we are doing this, glue will solidify, so we have only a limited time window. After you are done, wrap your LED in tape. It doesn't do much, it's mainly to limit how much light leaks out of it, so it doesn't show up through the model itself. Tape won't stop all of the light, but it will stop enough of it, especially if you pick a darker color, to make a difference. I only had white, so I used white. In the other LED, which will go inside the superstructure, I want to have exactly 24 strands. I cut the ends to make them even, and same as before, a little bit of glue inside, and then we insert. I've made way too much space inside this bulb, so the strands are quite loose. Since it appears they are all in, I just have to hold them until glue solidifies. And back to the engines. It's a little embarrassing to admit, but I took out the previously cut optic fiber strands and I've lost them. So we are cutting them again. I've picked 1mm optic fiber for smaller engines and 1.5 for larger engines. Just putting them through each drilled hole to make sure they fit. It's a tight fit, so it's not as easy as it looks. The main 3 ones went through okay, so onto the smaller ones. This is about as much as we will need, so let's start cutting. This is our little engine Firefly we've put together a few minutes ago. I've added wires to it between recordings. There are 2 LEDs here. The one placed at the bottom will feed the 3 large strands, and the other, which will go on top, will take the 4 medium strands. While the glue in our engine lights is solidifying, we should prepare holes for ship lights. I will be using the thin 0.6mm optic fiber and the 0.6mm drill. I'd prefer to use 0.5, but I don't have one. Previously, I've managed to get 41 strands into ship lights LED, which is amazing, by the way. So I will be making 36 ship light holes. These tiny optic fibers are prone to breaking, so I want to have a small margin of error. I don't really have any kind of a plan for where I put those holes, so I just start drilling wherever I feel like. You will often see that I stop. My drill is too fast here. It's on the lowest setting, 8000 RPM, but that's still too fast. It heats up all the plastic around, and plastic trash builds up on my drill. It has to be cleaned off as soon as possible to prevent melting large parts of the model through friction. After drilling each hole, I go through it one more time to clean up any remaining plastic that might have gone in, eventually correcting each hole with a hand drill. With this many windows, I figured it would be a good idea to start marking them, to count and to find them. After 20 minutes of this, glue in engine lights should be good to go. I wrap the Firefly in tape and insert it into the model from the inside. Since we have our drill ready to go, let's do the superstructure. I'm going to do the same thing as with the ISD trench, starting with the bridge. 8 lights will go in here, spread evenly. Moving on to the superstructure. 16 windows to go. I'll be honest, I'm just picking random spots. There is only one thing to do now. I have to get those optic fiber strands into the bridge, right? But there is so much plastic here. Well, the answer is simple. Grind it all away. With this, I will be able to lead 8 strands into the bridge. Just need to do some cleaning up to make sure the bridge will actually close, and there we go. Before inserting optic fiber into the superstructure, I want to attach long cables to the LED. If I did that after placing the LED in a tight space, I'd risk damaging strands with heat from soldering iron. The thinner the optic fiber, the easier it is to damage it with heat. I pick 8 strands and put them through the hole I made in the tower. Following this, I started inserting them into each window. Since these can easily fall out, I heat up the end of each strand with a lighter to create the expanding mushroom shape I described before. When I'm done, I simply close the structure and put LEDs through each hole I made, while carefully separating remaining strands and inserting them into each superstructure level one at a time. Due to how I placed the strands, I realized that this plastic piece has to go. This was avoidable, but hey, I make mistakes. This is why you should always use strands and cables that are much longer than what you need. If these were cut to size from the start, this would have been painfully difficult to do. In addition, the tip of each fiber can get damaged while inserting, so if you have longer strands, you can just cut the damage off. Some strands will have a harder time getting through. We'll have to help them with different tools. Towards the end, I started having to pick specific strands to avoid tangling them up too much. Now the annoying part starts. I need to pull each strand slowly and carefully, so the LED ends up inside the superstructure. Again, this has to be done slowly, one by one, a few millimeters at a time. If you do too much at once, a strand might break, and then you will have to replace it somehow. This should be close enough. Time to insert remaining strands. With the LED in proper spot, I'm securing it with hot glue. I have to be very careful not to get any on the optic fiber inside the model, because heat might damage it and force me to do everything all over again. Let's finish up. Cut optic fiber a few at a time, very close to the model, 2 or 3 millimeters away from the plastic. Before, we were treating our optic fiber with a lighter. That is because then we didn't need that optic fiber to be in a good shape or to look nice, so we could use the volatile lighter. Now, these will end up on the final model. Instead of a lighter, we are going to use the soldering iron. Mine is heated to 550 degrees Celsius. Avoid touching the model or any of the strands. At this temperature, you will easily ruin either of those things. Just hold it up to the end of each strand and let the mushroom form. When that's done, take a very small amount of superglue in gel form and using a needle or something else equally thin, put a little bit under each optic mushroom and slowly push each strand into the model. If you are careful enough, it should stay in position even if you made mistakes cutting or forming the mushroom shape. Repeat for every single strand. Try doing no more than 3 or 4 at a time. Be patient, this is going to take a while. And that's the superstructure done! All that's left is to insert it into the top half of the main hull. And now for something completely different. Engines. Again. I don't have much to say here. Large engines are already in. I just secure them and insert their smaller ones, later pushing the LED duo as far towards the engines as possible to make room for soldering. I push it a bit further than necessary because I will have to retract each strand a little bit once I make the mushroom ending. Happy with where everything is right now, I prepare to use a hot glue gun. Tape is your friend, use it to keep wires and optic fiber in place. Before gluing the LEDs, I cut off excess fiber and secure it with a soldering iron, same as on the superstructure. Now, a little bit of glue. All strands are in place. Time to use hot glue gun to secure the firefly. Hot glue doesn't conduct electricity, so it's perfect for securing exposed wires and cables. With the firefly secure, it's time to connect it to the power switch. Just checking if everything is working properly. And then I secure the switch and the battery bed with hot glue. Before we insert ship lights optic fiber, we have to insert magnets that will keep our ship shut. We do this now because optic fiber is going to be all over the place, and we don't want it getting in, under, or between magnets, because if it does, strands will get crushed or get damaged in other ways. I've identified 5 points where magnets will be necessary. The strongest magnet, the biggest one, will go here, on the nose of the ship. Then, 2 more magnets on either side, halfway, making sure the sides close up. We'll see where exactly they end up, but it will be close to those 2 columns. Finally, 2 small magnets in each corner, here and here. We will have to make some space for the 2 magnets at the rear of the ship, so let's get to it. I'll use a spherical diamond tip drill, but any drill of similar size will work. Just be careful not to drill through the model. Let's start with the rear. I'll be using 3 by 2 mm magnets. I can insert them easily by putting them on a corner of a palette knife, then I will put a little bit of superglue inside each hole, and then just slide the magnet off the knife while holding the magnet in place with something that isn't magnetic, like a finger. Repeat on the other side. Here polarity doesn't matter, not yet. Push both magnets a little bit deeper into the hole, as there has to be space for a 3 by 1 mm magnet, which will be attached to the top half of the hole. Now I'll put 3 by 3 mm magnets on either side of the model, around halfway through its length. Find a spot where the magnet will not stand out of the model, where it will not stick out of the model. I've picked those two spots, but those might be a bit too deep. Fortunately, I know the model and magnets hold, so it's fine. And finally, the nose. The top half of the ship has almost no space for a magnet, so we have to find a proper spot deep enough into the ship, but not far enough from the nose so it doesn't close. I will be using a 10 by 2 mm magnet, and I figured this is going to be the best spot to place it. These magnets are quite strong and they are prone to breaking if closed suddenly, so I'll be putting tape over it to make closing of the model softer. The time has come to install the red LED with trench lights. We have our LED with optic fiber installed, now we have to find a spot for it. In the back, between engine lights will be the best one, because it will allow us to weave different strands all over the ship. The thin strands are quite fragile, so it's better to take the long path around instead of, trying to make them as short as possible. For this reason, I need to remove this piece of plastic. When you do this, try to leave a small overhang next to the column. It will help manage optic fiber strands. The LED has to be attached by cables, of course. I'll be using excess wires from before, so they don't go to waste. After attaching cables, I insert the LED in between engine lights. Then, attaching it to wires I left sticking out of the engine firefly. I am bending the wire and not attaching it at the very tip, instead a little bit lower, because I still have the top side of the ship left to attach. And now we can start weaving. I start by finding the shortest strands to use them in windows that are closest to the LED. After these are done, just go ahead and start picking from one side and weave them through the model one by one in order. This will prevent them from getting tangled. The windows close to the LED will be easy, but other ones might require some creativity in how you place them. When you start getting further away from the LED, try using various pieces of plastic and other cables to hold each optic fiber strand in place exactly where you want it. If you have that option, try to weave the current strand under another one that is already stable and in place. And of course, avoid putting them over magnets, because that will eventually crush them. Remember that these are quite delicate. Oftentimes it's better idea to use tweezers to carefully lead them through instead of trying to wiggle around with your fingers. The small ones are prone to cracking, so don't hesitate to go the long way around. And remember, tape is your friend. With all that in mind, it's a simple but long process. Take your time. When you are done with one side, cut off excess optic fiber. You could go ahead and secure them with mushrooming and glue, but I prefer to leave that for later, so I leave a little bit of the optic fiber still sticking out. Now doing the other side, making full use of existing wires and fiber to keep new strands close to the bottom of the model. Note how often I use tweezers and how I weave the optic fiber under cables and under other strands. As you're weaving, optic fiber will sometimes form a circle. Don't let it unfold itself, because it might break in half. Instead, unwrap it by twisting it 180 degrees and let each strand rotate itself to adjust. There are only two things left to do in this entire project. We have to secure ship lights on the bottom half of the hull and combine both halves. Since we installed magnets before, I'll install magnets on the top side right now. This will allow glue to set while I am securing optic fiber. You don't need to be very accurate. The model will be held properly in place by the remaining columns, assuming you have remaining columns. You should have them. Just make sure you get the polarity right. I'm using 3x1mm magnets for the middle and aft parts, and the nose will get the big one, the 10x2mm magnet. I already know where exactly to put them, but if you are only figuring it out, you can do a little trick. Do you remember the plastic baggies that have Armada cards in them and other components? Those baggies are made out of plastic that doesn't merge with most superglue brands. You can put a piece of that on a magnet, throw another magnet on it, place a large drop of glue on the other magnet and close the model. If you picked magnets of correct thickness, the other one will touch the top piece of the model, glue will set after a while, and there you go, magnets attached in perfect spots. Open the model and remove the piece of a plastic bag that separated those magnets. The only problem with this method is that depending on which superglue brand you pick, it may cause fogging inside the ship, dimming the light from optic fiber. Right now I'm securing ship lights. It's exactly the same story as before. I use heat from soldering iron to create a mushroom shape at the end of each strand. I put a little bit of superglue under the mushroom and push those strands in, all while holding the model at roughly a 60-degree angle to the soldering iron. I do this because I don't want to burn optic fiber that I've already done before, and I don't want the heat, which, travels upwards, to damage optic fiber still sticking out of the ship. And same as before, I do only a few strands at a time. It's time to connect both halves of the ship. We want connecting cables to reach almost just enough to lay down both halves right next to each other. Previously I planned to attach those cables to the engine firefly, but I've since changed my mind and I will be attaching them to the ship lights LED instead. The reason for that is how those cables will bend once the model is closed. I want them to bend and land in between engine lights. If I attach them to the engine firefly, they might have gone sideways. I have to be extremely careful here. I don't want to damage any engine optic fiber with the soldering iron or any dripping solder. With cables attached, we need to secure them from any moving parts. We don't want the negative and positive wires to cross, because that will cause a short circuit and burn out our LEDs, so, well, For that purpose, I'm going to use a glue gun to hide exposed wire. We will be gluing extremely close to the optic fiber, protected by placing something in between the piece you will flood with glue and fiber itself. Luckily, hot glue cools down very quickly, so we don't have to hold it down for very long. Okay, first time closing. Bend the wires yourself to guide them into the shape you want them to be in. Something is not right. It's not closing properly on the left side. I will also cut off this top piece from the engines. It's making opening and closing the model a bit too difficult. I placed the battery too close to that side, and it's preventing the model from closing completely. I need to move the battery deeper. I'm not attaching it yet, so I can move it further if I have to. But it's not just the battery though. Something else is blocking the model, near the middle. I was thinking maybe I got the magnets wrong? I'm testing them right now, but that's not it. I take my time poking and prodding and feeling the model out. Eventually I figure out that the ship light's LED is too high. This is pretty problematic. If I insist on closing the model like this, if I keep pushing the LED downwards, I might break an engine optic fiber. It's so close to closing properly, but not quite there. But as always, I have a solution. I simply have to move that LED deeper inside. I carefully detach the positive wire, which was placed on top of everything else, and then I simply lead it underneath hard engine optic fiber strands. After carefully attaching it again, I test if lights still work. Well, they do. And now the model closes the way it should. It's almost ready. A ton of light is leaking, but we can fix that later. The last, and I really mean it, I really mean it, the last thing to do is to seal light leaks. Well, you can clearly see them, right? At the base of the superstructure, all around, here, for example, and on the other side too. It's not showing up well on the camera, but you have to believe me. Light is leaking, you can see inside the model. Fixing it is quite easy. We are back to using the wood glue. Pour some out, and try not to make a mess like I just did. You will need something thin to insert the glue into cracks in the model, for example a needle. I like using this type of glue for a few reasons. First of all, it's easy to apply, even with a cracked, leaky needle like this one. I really need to buy a new one. Second of all, it solidifies into a mostly transparent but smooth and strong surface which can be very easily painted over. And lastly, if you make a mess, you have plenty of time to clean it up. And we are done! I'm done! Okay, go ahead and now try it yourself. Good luck!